If you're planning to drive anywhere in this country over the next few days, you need to hear this before you set off, because transport analysts are calling this the busiest summer getaway in years, and the wrong departure time on the wrong road could turn a 3-hour drive into something closer to 5. Let's break down exactly which routes are worst, precisely when to avoid them, and how to actually get where you're going without losing half your day sitting in traffic. We're in what the RAC is calling the Saturday Summer Scramble, and the numbers behind it are genuinely significant. Across this Thursday through Sunday, an estimated 14.1 million leisure trips are set to take place by car, with Saturday itself the single busiest day. 3.8 million individual journeys happening in one 24-hour window. Friday and Sunday will each see around 3.4 million trips, and on top of all of that, a further 16.2 million journeys are spread across the earlier part of this week, as plenty of drivers try to stagger their departure specifically to dodge the worst of the weekend crush. Put together, this is shaping up to be the second highest getaway weekend since RAC Records began tracking this back in 2016, behind only the summer of 2022, when the entire country was traveling again for the first time after the pandemic. Let's go through exactly where and when the worst of it is expected to hit, because the specific timing here genuinely matters more than the general advice to expect delays that most coverage settles for. Today, Thursday, the M25 clockwise between Junction 15 and Junction 19 is forecast to see around 40 minutes of delay starting from 7 in the evening. At the same time, further north, the M1 southbound between Junction 16 and Junction 6 is expected to be even worse, roughly 80 minutes of delay starting from 10 this morning, making it one of the single worst stretches of road anywhere in the country today. Tomorrow, Friday, the M25 flips direction for its worst delays, anti-clockwise between Junction 17 and Junction 12, with around 45 minutes of holdup starting from 7 in the morning, meaning an early start won't necessarily save you on this particular stretch the way it typically would elsewhere. Up in the northwest, the M60 clockwise between Junction 7 and Junction 18 is expected to see around half an hour of delay from 4:30 in the afternoon, catching commuters and getaway traffic in exactly the same window. Saturday itself, the actual peak day of the entire weekend, sees its worst congestion back on the M25 anti-clockwise, Junction 17 to Junction 12 again, roughly half an hour of delay building from 2 in the afternoon. If you're traveling specifically on Saturday and that stretch of the M25 sits anywhere on your route, shifting your departure meaningfully earlier or later than early afternoon is likely to make a genuinely significant difference to how much of your day gets eaten up sitting in queued traffic. Beyond these specific windows, INRIX has flagged the M4 westbound between Junction 22, the Severn Crossing, and Junction 35 near Bridge End as a consistent hotspot across the whole period, which matters if you're heading toward Wales or the southwest specifically. The general pattern holding across nearly every one of these hotspots is the same. Delays cluster either through the middle of the day or into early evening, which is exactly why the standard advice from both the RAC and INRIX keeps repeating itself. Traveling before 8 in the morning or after 7 in the evening consistently avoids the worst of it, across virtually every route and every day this weekend. It's worth understanding where everyone's actually heading, because the destination data explains a lot about which specific routes are getting hit hardest. The southwest and northwest of England are drawing the largest share of holidaymakers this year. Cornwall, Devon, Dorset, and Somerset together are pulling in around 9% of all leisure trips, making the M5 and the routes feeding into it some of the most consistently congested corridors of the entire weekend. The Sussex and Kent coasts are drawing a similar 8%, Scotland another 8%, East Anglia 7%, and Wales 6%. If your destination sits anywhere in these clusters, assume you're sharing the road with a genuinely enormous number of other families making exactly the same trip at exactly the same time. If you're heading further afield through a port, there's a specific piece of advice worth following precisely rather than treating as a rough suggestion. The Port of Dover has been explicit that arriving earlier than 2 hours before you're sailing doesn't help you at all. It simply adds you to a queue sitting in the port itself for longer, and drivers are being urged to stick strictly to main routes when approaching, since diverting onto smaller local roads specifically to try to skip queuing tends to create exactly the local congestion those roads aren't built to handle. There's a financial layer to all of this worth being upfront about too, because it changes some of the calculus around whether staggering your journey or choosing an alternative route is worth the extra time. Fuel prices sit considerably higher than they did this time last year. Filling a typical 55-liter family car now costs around £8.90 more for petrol, and a genuinely striking £21.20 more for diesel, compared to the same weekend 12 months ago. RAC spokespeople have suggested this is part of why so many families appear to be choosing UK breaks over flying this year, alongside ongoing disruption at airports, which is exactly why domestic road traffic is running as high as it is, despite the increased cost of actually making the journey. Let's talk about what you can actually do with all of this information, because a list of delay statistics is only useful if it changes how you actually plan your own trip. If your journey touches any of the specific junction pairs and time windows we've covered, shifting your departure by even 90 minutes either side of the predicted peak can make a genuinely disproportionate difference. Congestion on motorways tends to build and clear in a curve rather than a flat block, meaning the edges of these windows are considerably lighter than the middle. If you have any flexibility at all over which day you travel, Thursday and Sunday are consistently lighter than Friday and Saturday across virtually every route we've covered, simply because fewer people are choosing to travel on those specific days. It's worth thinking about alternative routes too, though with a genuine caveat attached. Sat-nav apps will often suggest diverting off a congested motorway onto A roads, or through smaller towns the moment they detect a slowdown, and sometimes that's genuinely the better option. But during a weekend with this much simultaneous traffic nationally, those same alternative routes are frequently being suggested to thousands of other drivers at the exact same moment, which can turn a quieter B road into its own bottleneck surprisingly quickly. Checking live traffic conditions immediately before you set off, rather than relying purely on a route planned the night before, genuinely matters more this particular weekend than it would on an ordinary one. Vehicle preparation is worth a mention here too, because a breakdown during exactly this kind of peak traffic period is considerably worse than the same breakdown on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. Basic checks, oil level, coolant, tire tread depth and pressure take a matter of minutes and meaningfully reduce your odds of becoming one of the vehicles actually contributing to the congestion everyone else is trying to avoid. If you are unlucky enough to break down on a motorway during this kind of peak period, recovery times run considerably longer than usual, simply because breakdown providers are dealing with a genuinely elevated call volume across the entire network at the same time. There's a practical comfort side worth mentioning too, particularly if you're traveling with children through what could realistically be several hours of stop-start traffic in hot July weather. Carrying plenty of water, sun cream, and something to provide shade inside the vehicle isn't just a nice-to-have suggestion, it's genuinely relevant advice, specifically because being stationary in traffic under direct summer sun for an extended period is a meaningfully different experience from the same wait on a cooler, cloudier day. It's worth understanding why this particular weekend has ended up so much busier than an average one, because the answer isn't purely about school holidays starting. That alone happens every single year without producing quite this scale of disruption. This year specifically, the timing of school breaks across England and Wales has clustered unusually tightly, with the overwhelming majority of schools finishing on the same handful of days rather than spreading out gradually across a couple of weeks, the way some regional variation normally allows. Layer on top of that a genuine shift toward UK-based staycations rather than flying, driven partly by cost and partly by ongoing airport disruption reported throughout the spring, and you end up with considerably more cars converging onto the same motorway network within the same narrow window than a typical July weekend would usually see. If you're traveling with a caravan or a trailer, it's worth building in extra planning time beyond what these delay figures already suggest, because towing vehicles are disproportionately affected by exactly the kind of stop-start congestion expected across most of these hotspots. Beyond the practical reality of slower acceleration and longer braking distances adding to your own journey time, towing through heavily congested stretches also increases the risk of overheating, particularly in direct summer sun with an engine working harder than usual at low, inconsistent speeds. If your route includes any of the specific stretches we've covered and you're towing, treating the upper end of the predicted delay window as your realistic expectation, rather than the average, is the safer assumption to plan around. So let's bring this together into something you can actually use for whatever journey you've got planned over the next few days. Check the specific junction and time window relevant to your actual route, rather than relying on general, expect delays advice, since the difference between departing at the predicted peak and departing 90 minutes either side of it is often the difference between a smooth run and sitting stationary for well over an hour. Where you genuinely have flexibility, Thursday and Sunday travel beats Friday and Saturday almost everywhere. Before 8 in the morning or after 7 in the evening consistently beats the middle of the day. Check live conditions immediately before setting off rather than the night before, particularly if you're considering an alternative route away from the motorway. And do the basic vehicle checks now, because a breakdown during this specific weekend is considerably more disruptive for you and for everyone stuck behind you than it would be on an ordinary day. None of this is designed to put you off traveling altogether. Millions of families are clearly going ahead with exactly these plans regardless of the numbers, and a well-timed departure genuinely does make the difference between a manageable drive and a miserable one. The pattern behind all of this is straightforward once you see it laid out properly. The delays aren't random, they're clustered predictably around specific junctions and specific hours, and drivers who check that detail before setting off consistently have a noticeably better weekend than those who simply set off at the time that happened to suit them and hoped for the best. It's also worth checking conditions again the morning of your actual departure, rather than treating everything covered in this video as fixed and final. Weather plays a genuine role here too, and heavy rain or an accident anywhere along these already stretched routes can compound the predicted delays considerably beyond what INRIX's baseline forecast accounts for. Most major traffic apps and the National Highways website update in close to real time, and a 5-minute check before you actually pull out of the driveway is a small habit that consistently pays for itself across a weekend like this one, particularly if anything has shifted meaningfully since the forecast was first published earlier in the week. If this helped you plan around the worst of it, hit subscribe, because I'll keep covering exactly this kind of practical, timely driving information whenever it genuinely matters. Bank holidays, half-terms, and the next major getaway weekend will all bring their own version of exactly this same pattern. And knowing where to check a few days ahead of time is a habit worth building, regardless of which specific weekend it happens to be. Stay safe out there, and I'll see you in the next one.